American History X, Racism in the United States.
During the colonization of America, slaves from Africa were brought to the country to accompany the settlers. Their lives were given little more value than to serve the white colonists in their daily lives. Even during the time that the U.S. Constitution was written, it was accompanied by a 3/5 compromise, which counted 3 out of every 5 slaves as people. The Civil War included a fight to abolish slavery, and although the 13th Amendment was established, it did not end the battle for human rights. The 14th Amendment promised equal protection of the law and various rights, and the 15th promised a right to vote. But again, the struggle remained through Jim Crow laws and black codes in which black people were still treated as subhuman. Black people faced arrest for arbitrary crimes, jail sentences, fines, violence, and even death, and remained under oppression, and in servitude. By the 1960s, some rights have been obtained, and many consider the country to have made significant progress forward. However, the issue of racism still permeates the country. Laws still exist that protect racism rather than prosecute it. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote from his jail cell in Birmingham in the 1960s to express the importance of nonviolent protest and demand for change and equality. Quoting St. Augustine, an unjust law is no law at all. Meanwhile, in 1964, Alabama Governor George Wallace denounces the civil rights movement, calling it a fraud, a sham, and a hoax. He touts that it infringes upon people's civil liberties and freedom of speech, that people should have the right to choose their neighbors or sell their house to whomever they choose. This illustrates that people still had a clear disdain for black people, and the only rights they felt were worthy were the rights of white people. Today, racial disparities in areas like education, healthcare, employment, wealth, and homeownership paint a very dark picture of the reality that racism is still rampant. Black people are statistically paid lower wages despite similar experience in education, have less access to affordable education and healthcare, and are underrepresented in roles of government. Mass incarceration also echoes Jim Crow-era laws, which largely prevent social mobility for people of color. Confederate monuments that were installed as symbols of white supremacy have been a point of contention for those who believe they are preserving their history, and those who know they actually serve as a reminder of a horrible time. Police brutality, racially motivated violence, and systemic racism are protested by millions across the country in solidarity with a movement known as Black Lives Matter. There is still a long journey in our fight against racism. Although humanity has been plagued by racism for centuries, the concept is relatively young. The term racism didn't actually appear until the 1930s, during a decade that the world faced Nazism across Europe. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, racism is a belief in the superiority of a particular race. While this definition is somewhat accurate, many believe that it does not do enough justice to describe the socio-political reality. Philosopher Antony Flew further elaborated on this definition by adding as meaning the advantaging or disadvantaging of individuals for no better reason than that they happen to be members of this racial group rather than that. The author of our textbook also points out that no definition is adequate unless it simultaneously makes clear what is wrong with it and proposes that beyond being a racially based disregard for the welfare of certain people, one is also a racist if they either do not care at all or not enough. Some object that racism doesn't exist because race is a social construct and that there is no biological basis for this concept. But this does not change that people make distinctions, conscientiously or subconsciously, on the basis of racial classifications.
Derek's racist indoctrination. In the film, Derek Vineyard becomes racially antagonistic after his father, a firefighter, is killed by African Americans. As a charismatic and intelligent young man, Derek makes strong impressions on his community, and especially on his younger brother Danny. Because Derek is so thoughtful and well informed, others in his life are unable to dissuade his radical beliefs, like his school principal, Dr. Sweeney, and other members of his family, like his sister, mother, and Murray, a man his mother is dating. Derek comes to be manipulated by a local white supremacist, Cameron, who uses Derek to build a large crew of neo Nazis. Derek leads the crew in terrorizing his neighborhood grocery store, the basketball courts at Venice Beach, and many other events alluded to but not directly shown in the film. Danny's racialist descent. As Derek's younger brother, Danny is highly influenced by Derek's leadership of the neo Nazi organization. Danny tries to offend his teachers by writing his own version of Mein Kampf in the first scene of the film, to which Dr. Sweeney creates a class, American History X, just for Danny. Dr. Sweeney instructs Danny to write a paper on Derek as his first assignment, which Danny struggles with. In school, Danny insults an African American student in the bathroom by blowing cigarette smoke in his face for picking on a fellow white student. Derek's conversion. Derek is imprisoned for killing two African American gang members as they attempt to break into his car. In prison, Derek initially joins other white supremacists for protection during his stay. However, he soon loses favor with the other white inmates and begins working with an African American inmate, Lamont, on laundry duty. Derek is eventually raped by the other white inmates and is left alone to befriend his African American co-worker in the laundry room. There, Derek's worldview becomes threatened as Lamont relays his experiences with police as a young African American. This experience, along with the lack of violence from African American gang members towards him, leads Derek to question his racist beliefs and biases. Derek is visited by Dr. Sweeney after his rape and vows to prevent Danny from becoming a member of Cameron's gang. Derek's return home. When Derek is released from prison, he comes home to find that Danny has befriended members of Cameron's gang. Derek warns Danny not to associate with the gang members and tells him not to attend a party at Cameron's house that night. Danny disobeys Derek and attends the party anyways. Derek assaults Cameron and flees to safety with his brother. Derek then shares his experience in prison with Danny, and it appears to have an effect on Danny's attitude towards Cameron's gang and even the ideologies he previously held. Once they return home, Danny completes his paper on Derek early that morning before school. Danny's paper. In his paper, Danny questions whether Derek really became a racist because of his father's murder at all. Instead, Danny recalls a moment where his father is critical of affirmative action at the dinner table and believes it was his own father that fomented that racial antagonism that Derek later developed. The next morning, Derek drops off Danny at school. Before putting his paper on Dr. Sweeney's desk, Danny visits the bathroom, and in the bathroom, Danny is shot and killed by the same African American student that he blew smoke on the previous morning.
As Danny writes his paper, he recalls an interaction between himself, Derek, and his father, where his father asks Derek what he's studying and why he's studying so hard at the kitchen table for breakfast. And Derek states that Mr. Sweeney is a really tough teacher, but being in his class is extremely rewarding and he really enjoys the reading and Mr. Sweeney as a teacher. Derek states that the book is by an African American author and that's what they'll be tested on. Which time his father asks, is it African American History Month? Derek states no, but that the author and the book are extremely well written and very educational. And at which time, Derek's father goes into a rant and starts to explain that at the fire station, they did not hire one white male employee, but yet 2 African American employees who had lower test scores. Derek's father continues to explain that this is due to affirmative action, though there's no way in the scene to prove or disprove what Derek's father is saying. He continues on and tells Derek that he needs to question why he's learning certain things, and a lot of the things that are happening right now are due to affirmative action. And he understands diversity is great, but if affirmative action is the only reason someone gets a job, that's extremely wrong. Looking back at the reading that we studied this semester, their father shares the ideology of a deontologist, one to say what is right and what is wrong, but can't agree on what exactly is to be right, what is to be classified as wrong. This is because deontologists disagree about exactly what moral rules are. This is evident when Derek's father tells him to keep studying to ace the test, but to still be mindful of what he's learning and what he's being told to learn. Derek's father may not agree about the choice of author or book, but he can agree with the teacher, Dr. Sweeney, that he needs to study hard and to do his best and score the highest score he possibly can. After the passing of Derek and Danny's father, Derek gets involved with and connected with Cameron. Cameron reviews and writes pro-white supremacy reviews on literature and music. Cameron sees the gift Derek has of communication and uses it to push confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is used to confirm beliefs or foster the beliefs they wish to have. This is seen twice in the movie, where Derek rallies a group of DOC members to go into a convenience store, in which he says hires illegal immigrants and to vandalize the establishment. The second is a dinner scene with Derek and his family and Murray, who's interested in Derek's mother. They get into a heated discussion of people living off welfare and immigrants coming to the country to take hard-working jobs from Americans every day. Derek goes on to say that slavery is used as a crutch and an excuse. Murray references the Holocaust and says, "Is that an excuse?" Derek becomes enraged. Derek refers to Murray and calls him a Jew, refers to him being Jewish, tells him to leave his home. After getting an altercation with his sister, he removes his shirt and reveals his swastika tattoo on his chest to Murray and his family. Derek uses confirmation bias and facts to fuel his argument. In the textbook, Jorge Garcia refers to philosopher Anthony Flew that states, to identify racism with negative beliefs about actual or alleged matters of a fact is a sinister and potentially dangerous thing. Jorge Garcia writes in his article, The Heart of Racism, and proposes that we conceive of racism as fundamentally a vicious kind of racially based disregard for the welfare of certain people. These two statements and philosophers go to show that racism is a learned action, not something people are born with, and that bias and stereotypes also play a role in how we view people. These are views that can be learned through generations and communities. This is not to say that it's racism between black and brown, brown or black, or brown or white. Racism can exist between the same ethnic group. An example of this is Hispanics born in America and Hispanics born in Latin America, and how they view each other. Hispanic and Latins born in the United States can view those born immigrating from Latin America as inferior, dirty, poor. This would be more common in those born third, fourth generation in the United States. The actions are wrong, but show how the same ethnic group can exercise racism amongst each other. Finally, the movie touched on topics discussed and argued about to this day. Derek and Cameron use confirmation bias and fear as a recruiting tool, but it also shows when you remove bias and stereotypes, you can find similarities in each other's upbringings, backgrounds, cultures, or ethnic groups. But even if you are to change your views, your past transgressions can come back to haunt you, as it showed in the movie. It may not harm you directly, but it may harm those around you. The last scene of the movie is the result of Danny's learned behavior and bias towards different ethnic groups by his father, Cameron, and Derek. Danny goes to the restroom before turning in his paper to Dr. Sweeney and is shot point blank by a student he had an altercation with the day before. If views are to change, it must be a generational shift.